All right, welcome everyone. I'm Micaela Schweitzer-Bluhm, the Executive Director of the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting. And thank you so much for joining us today for what I know will be a fascinating discussion. When you see a big project published in the Maine Monitor, it is the culmination of months of painstaking work. And today, David Dahl, who's the editor of the Maine Monitor, and Samantha Hogan, the government accountability reporter for the Maine Monitor, are going to answer our questions about how a big investigative report is researched, developed, and published. Samantha dropped, but she is gonna rejoin us in just a minute, I am sure. While we're waiting for Samantha, I'll just mention we're gonna focus on her award-winning investigation into the Maine judicial system's approach to defending indigent people charged with crimes, and her most recent reporting on illegal wiretapping of conversations between inmates and their lawyers. Samantha was named Maine Journalist of the Year in 2021 for her reporting, and she was just named a finalist for the Institute for Nonprofit News Network awards in the Best Investigative Reporting category. So we're super proud of you, Samantha. I want to congratulate for you on that. I'm going to start by asking them my own questions, but I invite you to submit your questions for David and Samantha in the chat. Our multimedia editor, George, is monitoring the chat and will be happy to help me flag those questions for me. He's also going to be posting some links for you all. So we'll go ahead and get started. David and Samantha, thank you so much for taking this time to give our readers a window into the investigative reporting process. Samantha, maybe I could ask you to kick us off by explaining how is a story idea born?
I think that any good investigation begins with just always being curious. And whenever I get really curious about a topic, about how widespread something might be, whether it's an isolated incident, how much money that might cost, how do other states do it, that's usually a really good jumping off point. And I end up going down lots of rabbit holes, and some of those turn into the investigations that you just mentioned. So when there were questions about how much money lawyers were billing the state and how Maine ran a really unique public defense system that was reliant all on private contracted defense attorneys, I just decided to look at discipline records for attorneys, and I kept finding matches between these two data sets. And so that ultimately led to a much broader investigation into Maine's public defense system. And then in the process of reporting on that story, I distinctly remember listening in on a commission meeting and hearing that the Attorney General's office had reported to a defense lawyer that they had received a recording of his phone call with a jailed client. And immediately sirens, I almost could see them in front of my eyes. It's that's really, really interesting. And I wonder if this is the only time that has happened. And that led to almost 2 years of reporting on this topic and finding out that it is, in fact, a fairly widespread issue that's happening in multiple jails across our state. So just always being curious and then trying to find the answers to those curiosities.
That's great. David, how do you know when Samantha brings you a story idea? How do you know it's going to be something worth doing?
I don't think we know immediately. We just we have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions, as Samantha knows. A good story often starts with questions. Why is this happening? How is it happening? Is there someone who's being wronged? Is there a victim here? In this case, there's a tension between a stated or an accepted standard. In the case of the eavesdropping series and the first series, really, it's the constitutional right to adequate counsel and the right to consult with your lawyer, an accused person to consult with their lawyer. And that's the standard that it would appear was being violated. And so that leads us to other questions. So much of editing takes place before the story is even written. It's the process of what else can we find out, as Samantha said, how many people, is this just an isolated incident? Is this just one case, or are there a whole bunch of cases? I've asked that question of not just Samantha, but some of our other reporters at the Maine Monitor.
Well, Samantha, tell me, when you're going through this process and you're having these discussions with David, are there twists and unexpected turns that come up? Did you experience any of that with the two series that we're talking about?
I think the biggest twist is always that I want the records. I want to see on paper in black and white what the state knows. And I've been very supported by the editors here at the Maine Monitor to sometimes take legal action in order to ensure that the public is going to have access to the records behind our investigations. And so twice now we've gone to court. We took the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services to court to look at an extensive database. I think we got over 6 million billing records in response to that, so that we could do two major investigations. First, to look at attorney discipline rates, but then also we found out that 2,000 case assignments had been made to lawyers that were not actually on the proper list. They had not applied, or in worst cases, they did not have the adequate qualifications to be working on those serious, complex criminal cases that they were working on. And that resulted in a direct change. The state made a policy change after our reporting came out and stopped that practice. And we did a much better job about verifying that attorneys were eligible for the cases that they were taking. But then we recently took the York County Sheriff's Office to court as well, or in the process of litigating this, to try and get records about how many attorney-client phone calls that jail may have recorded in the past couple of years. Now, we've received these records from other counties. Other counties have not. And so it becomes a question of, are state agencies following the state's public records laws? And so those are usually the biggest twists that we find out, is that we don't have access to information that should be public, and we've taken people to court over it.
Yeah, well, David and Samantha, an impressive amount of work and time and effort, as you've just outlined, particularly in trying to get the records, goes into these stories. And I do want to pause on my questions just for a minute and remind folks that the Maine Monitor and the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting it's a nonprofit organization. We're a nonprofit news organization, entirely funded by grant organizations and by readers like you. And we are in the midst of our summer fundraising campaign, and we have a matching challenge from one of our longtime funders of $10,000. So we are still taking donations for our summer appeal, and we would love your support. So if you can help us out with even just a little bit, we would love to receive your support. I know George will put the link to donate into the chat. David, maybe you could talk about how you confirm the information that is in an investigative report. How do you verify that everything is correct and factual?
Right. There's no one single way. It's more questions. It's questions of how do we know that, basically, how can we verify that, who is telling us that. You listen carefully to what Samantha just talked about. She's a computer-assisted reporter. She's a Freedom of Information Act expert. She's also kind of a little bit of a conductor of a legal effort. We have worked closely with lawyers here in Maine, as well as the Media Freedom and Information Access Clinic at Yale to seek records. The records have helped us verify things. So have interviews with individuals involved in the stories. We seek to find what Woodward and Bernstein refer to as sort of the best obtainable version of the truth, and we're constantly trying to find out more about whatever circumstance it is that we're investigating at the time. So in some cases, in a recent case, we sent a letter to people that we were writing about, and that ended up proving to be really helpful in the shaping of the story. We're trying to be fair and give people the best opportunity we can give them to explain what's going on, but it also helps us to understand what's going on as we shape the story.
Well, maybe I could follow up on that point actually, and ask you, are there ever any concerns as the editor about the ramifications or implications for the organization of the work that you're doing, and how do you work through those?
I'm always concerned. I want to be accurate and fair, and also check and double check and triple check. We also consult with our lawyers to ensure that we are being fair and following every possible rule and law that we can. In addition to that, our stories are back read by a copy editor as well as by our attorneys. So we're endeavoring to be as accurate as we possibly humanly can be.
Yeah. Well, Samantha, I wonder if you can talk about what's been the impact of these stories that you've been writing, these investigations that you've done.
Yeah, so I've been in Maine for 3 years, and we are starting to see some actual changes coming out of the investigative work that we've done. The ACLU of Maine filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of defendants who were receiving legal services from the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services, essentially accusing the executive director, the state, and the 7 commissioners that had overseen that state organization of failing in the prior decade to create an effective public defense system for the state. There was funding for the first 5 public defenders to be hired at some point, we think, this year, which was a legislative action. But that is still a far cry from what even the heads of this agency say is needed in order to ensure that every single person who's coming in contact with the justice system and can't afford to hire their own lawyer, to guarantee that they actually have effective assistance of counsel, and that in some counties even have a lawyer at all. Right now, there are places where Maine is struggling to appoint lawyers. But we've also seen the governor call for greater accountability. We've seen other government investigations take place into MCILS. There's a study group actually that's getting started next week that's going to look at the jail phone recording issue extensively. And my reporting is some of the materials that they've been given to review. So I do think that the Maine Monitor is having an impact on the state government, and that they're listening to the reporting that we're doing, which is hugely flattering. But ideally, what we're doing is also drawing attention to real issues that are affecting the public, that the state government should be paying attention to.
Great. Well, I do want to remind folks that are watching that we're happy to take your questions as well. If you have any questions that you would like Samantha and David to answer about the investigative work that they do, reporting the work of the Maine Monitor, please put it in the chat. Look forward to your questions. David, the Maine Monitor was recognized by multiple organizations with awards for reporting across portfolios this past year for work done by all of our team of journalists. Can you maybe share a bit about what the Maine Monitor is working on now, and what are some of the highlights from this year so far?
The highlights from this year so far, I'll go back a little bit earlier than January. Rose Lundy, who's our public health reporter, has done some terrific work involving nursing homes and nursing shortages. She focused last year on the lack of nurses in Maine as the pandemic continued going forward, focused on the use of contract nurses or out-of-state nurses to come into Maine, and how certain nursing homes were relying on contract nurses. That was an early signal of some of the financial weaknesses of nursing homes, and some of those outlet facilities actually closed after her story. So she was sort of like an early warner, if you will, of that. She also focused on a community, Cooper's Mills, that had where a nursing home had closed, and what the impact of that was on that community, where people now had to drive miles and miles and miles to visit their loved one. Those stories won some awards from Report for America, and from the Public Health Association here in Maine. She's now been focusing on quality of care at assisted living facilities here in Maine, and revealed some tragic deaths in a couple of places. One long-term care where two people had actually wandered out of the nursing home, and one of whom was struck and killed by a car, and another instance in which a resident died under very unusual circumstances, where she had wandered outside of the facility in December, and was not found for more than an hour. She died a few days later. Kate Koff, who's our environmental reporter, has been very busy. She last year wrote a story that remains our most popular story on the Maine Monitor website, a story about a discovery of lithium in the property of a couple in Newry, Maine. Lithium is a highly sought after mineral. I'm not sure if it's an element. I think it's a mineral. You correct me if I'm wrong. Used in battery making. And she's done a couple follow-ups on that, but she's also explored other mining efforts around the state. She's currently working on a story about sea level rise here in Maine and its impact on the coastline. She also writes our weekly Climate Monitor newsletter that focuses on the environment. Barbara Walsh, who's our terrific Pulitzer Prize winning narrative reporter, wrote a series of stories earlier this year about the lives of transgender men and women living in Maine, and how in some cases they're isolated and outcast, and how they have endured, and I think in a few cases prevailed over a lot of societal pressure. It was a fascinating series of stories. She looked at young people and middle-aged to older folks. That won a lot of attention from people. Courageous steps forward by the people who spoke to Barbara. Great work by Barbara in earning their trust, and a lot of positive feedback after that story ran.
That's great. Yeah. I want to remind folks that if you haven't already, you can sign up to receive any of our newsletters. We have a daily digest newsletter, which highlights the most critical reporting from across Maine on a daily basis. We have the Climate Monitor, which David just mentioned, in which Kate talks about the most critical climate issues of the week and wraps up some stories for your attention. And then our Sunday Monitor, which is focused on our original reporting. And I know George just put a link in the chat, so if you want to sign up to receive any of those, you can receive all three. You can select which ones you want to receive, so please sign up for those. And just as a reminder, we are doing our summer appeal. All the work that goes into those newsletters and the work that David and Samantha are talking about that goes into these stories, all the incredible stories that David just outlined by Rose and Kate and Samantha and Barbara really do take an effort and funding. And we are entirely funded by grant organizations and by our readers like you. So we appreciate any donations that you can provide for this summer appeal. Samantha, the series that you did on the defense system, defenseless, was funded in part by a few different organizations. The International Women's Media Foundation, Pulitzer, and then of course Report for America helps to fund your position as well as Rose and Kate's. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what it's like working with the different foundations when you are working on a story.
Yeah, so just to be clear, Defenseless was actually done through the ProPublica local reporting network, which we're hugely grateful for the opportunity to get to work with them. And then the more recent reporting that we did on the jails was sponsored by those organizations that you just mentioned. And we're hugely grateful for the money that they too committed to doing lengthy months of reporting onto this topic. But yeah, the opportunity to get to work with organizations like this has been transformative for me as a young journalist who's still trying to get her investigative legs beneath her. And it's allowed me to work with some truly great mentors. Recently with our investigation into the jails, we partnered through Report for America with the Investigative Editing Corps. And Rose Ciota, who's the founder of that organization, has been working as an editor, as a project manager, as a mentor, and she, has her own Pulitzer Prize awards underneath her. So she's been hugely helpful to work with, and to be such a small organization and get to work with these larger groups that have such immense knowledge is hugely helpful and great.
And thank you, Samantha, for correcting me. I hope folks will forgive my newbie mistake there. David, there's a question in the chat, which I'm going to put to you. Renee asks, as a nonprofit, how does the Monitor ensure its funders don't have influence over the reporting?
Great question. We pride ourselves on our independence. I've not gotten any sort of a request by anybody to do things one way or the other. We disclose who our funders are on our website. Transparency is usually the best disinfectant for that. I think that reputation kind of travels with us through the ecosystem of grantors and funders, and so they know not to ask, if you will, and not to approach us, if you will, because they know that we wouldn't countenance anything like that.
Thanks. Samantha, you did mention that you're a young journalist, and I think readers would be curious what brought you into the field of journalism, and what do you most enjoy about in-depth investigative reporting?
So I wanted to be a writer, and my parents said you can go to college and study anything, but you can't study English literature. And so my mom said, hey, why not journalism? And I said, that sounds cool. And I went to college, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I had been on my high school newspaper, and then I was on my college newspaper. And with every successive step, up the ladder, you learn more and more what is right and what is wrong. And I've just really fallen in love with getting to just talk to a range of people and to learn something new basically every single day. I think that's the best part about being a journalist, is that it's like you're learning every single day. Like you're putting yourself through your own little class, and getting to just really humbly ask people questions that they're much more infinitely knowledgeable about. So I really enjoy that. And joining the Maine Monitor, it really gave me a chance to sit down and write longer, more in-depth, infinitely longer researched pieces than I had at the daily newspaper that I was working at before. So it's definitely, it's really cool to be given the space to work on really large projects like this at such a young age.
And David, I'll ask you, because I think, how do you see our journalists, our relationship with the Report for America is about cultivating that next generation of in-depth reporters. And why do you think it's important that we secure that next generation of journalists?
Because journalism and the quest for truth is so crucial to a fair and functioning democracy. We are, absolutely crucial to making this country and so many other countries work in a way that is equitable. Without the work that we do, bad things happen. The cost of funding government goes up. The quality of life goes down. These are sort of proven problems that studies have identified. We've seen throughout the country, throughout the U.S., a collapse of traditional news organizations over the last couple of decades. And what's exciting about the Monitor and exciting about working with younger reporters is to sort of see both a new sustainable model, that nonprofit model that you mentioned, which we work for the people who fund us, but also the desire and interest among the next generations of reporters who want to be in this business and want to find the truth and want to right wrongs and to afflict the comfortable, as somebody said a long time ago. So it's just so inspiring to work with people like Samantha and Rose and Kate and Barbara, who want to continue to tell important stories for Maine.
Thanks, David. That is, it's good to hear. Good to hear and heartening. We do have a question from a viewer, which is, what kind of feedback do you get from readers? You talked about, the readers. Our readers are our supporters. What kind of feedback do we get from our readers on the stories that you publish?
I'll start this one, Samantha, if you want. We get all kinds of feedback, Mika. We usually get very positive feedback. We actually keep a file that we call our testimonial file. Oftentimes, people are telling us that this is an only in the Monitor story. If it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't know about that. And that is kind of our sweet spot. We see that in the feedback that comes to us directly, but many people on this Facebook Live event know, but maybe some don't, that our stories are also amplified because they're picked up by our news organizations around the state. The Portland Press Herald, the Bangor Daily News, Maine Public, the Machias Valley News and Observer, many other publications have picked up our stories, and they're republished and amplified through that network of our partners. And it's also fascinating to read the comments on the stories when they're published on those publications as well, to learn what readers in Portland are saying about developments that occur in Washington County, for example, or read the responses in the Bangor Daily News to stories that Samantha has written. So usually it's positive and praising our work. Sometimes enjoy reading comments, because sometimes you read comments and it's somebody who really knows what's going on. They're clearly following the issue very carefully, and they actually give you a tip. They say, why don't you look at this? Or what about that? Yeah, that's fun too.
Yeah, Samantha, have you?
I would agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's largely positive, and then the times that it's not overtly positive, they're just saying you need to push the governor, or you need to push lawmakers further on this point. And it's often valid criticism, and ultimately it's not going to determine how we cover a subject, but it's always great to get feedback like that, and to have someone pushing you to go even harder and look at an issue from another angle. So I always welcome all of that. I don't think anyone has been mean, which I appreciate, and don't bring on the hate.
Well, that's good. We're reaching the half-hour mark, and I did promise you guys have news that you need to get back to, so I don't want to keep you here for too long. I want to thank you both so much for the time and for your insights, and for being frank and honest with us about the experience of doing this work and working for the Maine Monitor and doing these investigative reports. I want to thank George, who's been great putting information in the chat and helping to flag questions. And want to thank everybody who joined us today for viewing, for your time, for reading the Maine Monitor, and for your support and contributions. As we've pointed out, we are entirely funded by you, our readers, and by our grant organizations. So you can still contribute to our summer appeal. Please do. We really appreciate that. There is one final question, David. I'm going to throw it to you. You mentioned it a little bit, but maybe could you talk about what's the full range of our relationship with other Maine media outlets?
They pick up our stories for free. So you will read a Maine Monitor story at any number of publications that I mentioned here in Maine: the Portland Press Herald, the Bangor Daily News, Maine Public. Some of the TV stations will cut and paste stories out of the Maine Monitor at our urging, and running them often a day or two after they appear first on the Maine Monitor site. We are providing that to them for free. We send out an email of our original stories, usually on Sunday afternoon. George and Harvey, and our multimedia editor, and in addition to doing a million other things, also does that, and they're able to use those stories. The relationship has evolved to the point where I'm in touch with some of those editors directly and talking about areas of further coverage. In some cases, in a handful of cases, we're also republishing stories in full on our site. In addition, we have a daily Monitor newsletter that is very popular. Almost 5,000 readers. We are collect the links from daily reports from news organizations around the state and redistribute them to our network via our newsletter that usually comes out around 5 o'clock in the afternoon every day.
Great. Well, and George put the link to subscribe to the newsletters in the chat. So please do remember, sign up for those newsletters so you can get Samantha, Kate, Barbara, Rose's excellent reporting. We also have podcasts, and we have Roger McCord's fun, fantastic videos that if you haven't seen, you really should go to themainmonitor.org and watch those videos. So much there. I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation. Again, David, Samantha, thank you so much. Thank you to George. And we will see you all in our newsletters and on our websites.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Take care.